They cut off his genitals. Then they called him lucky. Most people do not know this. In the imperial China, male concubines were real. Not just servants, not just favorites. They were boys taken from their homes, castrated to make them safe for palace life. They could not father children. They could not threaten the emperor's bloodline. And without family, they had no loyalties. Some were chosen for their voices, some for their faces. All were trained to serve the emperor in every way he desired. They lived in silk, under gold ceilings, but they had no freedom, no future, no way to say no. This was not a secret. This was the system, and it lasted for centuries. Before we begin, you may want to subscribe. This is not the kind of history most people are taught. And if you are watching from somewhere distant, tell us where and when. We read everything, and we appreciate your help in our journey through history. In ancient China, emperors were allowed to take many concubines. Most were women, but some were not. For centuries, especially during the Ming and Qing dynasties, emperors kept male concubines inside the palace. They were not officially called that. In court documents, they were labeled with vague titles: personal attendants, inner court officials, chamber boys. But everyone inside the Forbidden City knew what they really were. Men chosen to serve the emperor in his private life, in his personal chambers, and sometimes in his bed. They were chosen young. Some were just 10 or 11 years old when they were brought into the palace. They came from poor families. Some were sold. Some were taken. The more attractive the boy, the more likely he would be selected for special service. Before they could begin that service, their bodies had to be changed. The rule was strict. Only castrated males were allowed to live and work inside the inner court. That included male concubines. The reason was simple. They could not be allowed to get a woman in the palace pregnant. They could not create a child who might claim the throne. They had to be completely non-threatening, politically and sexually. So the first step was castration. It was a requirement, not a punishment, not a medical need, just part of the system. The procedure was brutal. It was done without anesthesia, without proper tools, and often without explanation. Some boys were held down. Others were told it would make them wealthy, powerful, or honored. The entire penis and testicles were removed. If the bleeding stopped and the wound healed, the boy was allowed to live. If not, he died. Those who survived were never the same. They often suffered infections, internal pain, or lifelong difficulty urinating. They walked differently. Their voices changed. Their hormones were permanently altered. But once it was done, there was no going back. The boy was cleaned, dressed in silk, given a new name, sometimes even a new birthday. The identity he had before the palace no longer mattered. He now belonged to the emperor. Inside the palace, appearance was everything. The male concubine was expected to remain attractive, delicate, and obedient. He was trained in how to speak softly, how to walk gracefully, how to respond without hesitation, how to suppress anger, fear, or desire. He lived near the emperor's quarters, always ready to be summoned. The emperor could call for him at any time. There was no schedule, no warning. If the emperor wanted company, the boy arrived dressed in fine robes, clean, scented, silent. No one said what happened after that. There were no records, there were no witnesses, and there was no right to refuse. Refusal meant punishment. Obedience meant survival, at least for a while. Some male concubines were favored. They received gifts, jewelry, land, even official titles. They had access to food, luxury, and influence. But that favor could disappear overnight. If the emperor lost interest, the concubine could be reassigned, locked away, or simply never called again. There was no explanation, no retirement, no return home. Once you entered the inner court, you belonged to it for life. The outside world no longer existed. Letters were censored, visits were restricted, and even the other members of the court were forbidden to speak openly about the emperor's male companions. To the public, these men did not exist, and to the emperor, they were tools, valued for beauty, loyalty, and silence. It was not a romantic life. It was not a position of power. It was a system of control dressed in gold. And the better you served, the more dangerous your life became. Because in the Forbidden City, to be seen was to be at risk, and to be desired was to become disposable. The palace was beautiful: red walls, carved gates, polished stone courtyards. But for the emperor's concubines, especially the male ones, it was also a prison. They could not leave, not for a walk, not for a holiday, not even to attend a family member's funeral. Every movement was watched, every word recorded, every visit approved in advance and followed by reports. There were rules for everything. A concubine could not raise his voice. He could not speak the emperor's name. He could not turn his back while leaving the imperial room. Even eye contact had limits. Too much was disrespectful. Too little could be seen as cold or disloyal. The rules were written, but not in public. They were memorized and passed down by senior eunuchs, men who had survived long enough to train the new ones. Mistakes were punished immediately, sometimes with beatings, sometimes with food withheld, sometimes with silence being ignored completely, which could be worse than pain. To the rest of the palace staff, male concubines were not real officials. They held no legal authority. They were not citizens in any full sense. They had no wives, no children, no property. Their bodies had been changed, their names reassigned, and their freedom taken away, but they were still envied. Why? Because proximity to the emperor meant access to power. And even if they could not use that power for themselves, others wanted to use them. Palace factions began to form. Some concubines were manipulated by court officials, used to whisper ideas to the emperor. Others were sabotaged by rival concubines, both male and female, who feared losing favor. False accusations were common. If the emperor believed the rumor, the punishment could be exile or death, with no trial, no record, and no defense. No one defended a concubine. There was no legal path to justice. They were considered property of the imperial household, not full subjects under the law. But what truly kept them in line was not just punishment. It was isolation. From the day they entered the inner court, their old lives were erased. They could not write to family freely. They could not form open friendships. They could not leave the palace grounds without an escort and official permission, something rarely granted. Even within the Forbidden City, their quarters were separated from the others. The male concubines lived between the eunuchs and the women's quarters, part of both worlds, but accepted in neither. Eunuchs saw them as weak and temporary. The women of the harem saw them as competition, so they stayed quiet. They learned not to ask questions, not to show pain, not to trust anyone, not even the other concubines. Each man had to survive on his own. Some kept their heads down and followed every rule. Others tried to gain favor through performance, singing, painting, or reciting poetry for the emperor. But even success was dangerous. A concubine who stood out too much might be seen as arrogant. One who stayed too quiet might be forgotten. There was no safe strategy, only careful steps, one day at a time. Ritual played a major role. When a concubine was summoned to the emperor's chambers, he had to follow exact procedures. He was bathed, perfumed, and inspected. He was led barefoot across cold stone floors. He bowed in silence before entering, and he left only when the emperor dismissed him, whether minutes or hours later. Every part of the interaction was designed to remind him, "You are not here by choice. You are here because you were allowed." Even his sleep was regulated. Concubines had to remain within a certain distance from the imperial bedroom, in case they were called at night. They could not drink wine. They could not change their hairstyle. Even minor changes to their appearance had to be approved. The idea was simple. A concubine was not a person. He was an extension of the emperor's pleasure. He existed only to serve and to vanish, without protest when he was no longer wanted. And so they vanished. Some quietly aged out of favor, relocated to smaller quarters, and spent the rest of their lives in silence. Others were accused of disloyalty and removed. Still others died suddenly, with no details ever recorded. And outside the palace, no one asked, because officially, these men did not exist. Their names were rarely included in historical records. They left no heirs. They owned nothing. They were remembered only by rumor. The system worked because it was complete. It controlled the body, the mind and the future. There was no escape, no protest, and no mercy. That was how male concubines survived or disappeared inside the most powerful court in the world. From the outside, it looked like privilege, fine clothing, rich food, proximity to the emperor. But on the inside, it was something else. For the emperor's male concubines, daily life was not just physically restricted, it was psychologically exhausting. They lived in a world where nothing was private, not their thoughts, not their actions, not even their emotions. Every word they spoke could be reported, every gesture might be misread. Even a glance at the wrong person could be taken as a threat. So they trained themselves to become invisible, even when standing in plain sight. They learned to speak only when spoken to smile when watched, to show interest without desire, to serve without appearing ambitious, and above all, to never draw attention for the wrong reasons. It took energy to live like that, not just once, but every hour of every day. Some began to break. There are reports, even in guarded palace records, of concubines who refused food, who stopped speaking, who stood for hours without moving, who asked quietly to be reassigned far from the emperor's sight, just to escape the pressure of being noticed. Most requests were denied. Inside the Forbidden City, once you were chosen, there was no way out. Even illness did not guarantee removal. Some concubines faked fevers or weakness, hoping to be moved to kitchen duty or archives. But pretending too well was risky. If the emperor suspected a lie, punishment was immediate. Others tried to adapt. They created systems for survival, some visible, some hidden. And apparently not everyone broke. Some found small ways to stay human. A few kept bird pets, tiny ones in bamboo cages. They hung them from the eaves of their sleeping quarters, feeding them scraps of fruit. One boy taught his to repeat a line of poetry, over and over, until the bird whispered it like prayer. Others practiced calligraphy, spending hours drawing the same characters with perfect symmetry. They wrote nothing personal, but they moved their hands with care. It gave them rhythm, control, a piece of themselves. One concubine carved the same pattern, a curling leaf into the handle of every incense fan he touched. Dozens of fans, dozens of leaves, scattered across the palace like a silent signature no one ever noticed. These small acts were not forbidden, but they were not encouraged. They were not resistance against the emperor. They were resistance against disappearing. But these moments could not shield them for long. Some tried to find comfort in each other, but even that was dangerous. Romantic or physical relationships between concubines were strictly forbidden. The emperor was expected to be the center of their emotional world. To love anyone else, man or woman, was considered betrayal. Still, some broke the rules. There are quiet mentions of bonds formed in secret, stolen glances, whispered confessions. But when discovered, these relationships ended in punishment. Separation, solitary confinement, sometimes worse. Escape was almost impossible. The Forbidden City had over 1,000 guards. Its walls were 30 feet high. Even if someone made it outside, they had no money, no name, and no family to receive them. Some tried anyway. Most were caught. None were recorded again. So instead of escaping, many chose something else, emotional withdrawal. They stopped thinking of the world outside. They stopped imagining futures. They lived one day at a time. Some focused on routine, folding robes, cleaning altars, arranging flowers. Some memorized poetry, not to recite, but to keep their minds from fading. Others formed quiet connections with older eunuchs, who taught them how to survive without hope. But all of it was a kind of waiting, a way to fill time in a place where time did not belong to you. The better you obeyed, the longer you might last. But even that offered no guarantee, because in the palace, survival was not just about submission. It was about staying useful, without ever being visible enough to become a threat. One concubine was praised for singing lullabies. He was said to calm the emperor's nerves. He smiled for years. Then one winter, he disappeared. No record, no burial, just a new concubine in his place. That was the rule. They could be replaced, without explanation, and no one dared to ask why. Most male concubines in the Forbidden City were forgotten long before they died, not because they did anything wrong, but because the system was designed to forget them. Once they lost favor with the emperor, whether because of age, illness, or simple boredom, they were reassigned. Some were given minor roles in palace management. Others were sent to work in archives or storage rooms. But they were no longer called, no longer seen, no longer needed. There was no retirement ceremony, no recognition, no thanks, just a slow fade into silence. Many of them lived the rest of their lives inside the same walls, same courtyards, same rituals. But now, no one looked at them. They became invisible. Outside the palace, the world kept changing. New emperors rose. New wars were fought. New ideas spread through the provinces about governance, science, even human rights. But inside the Forbidden City, time moved differently. The same rules stayed in place, the same uniforms, the same ranks and rituals. For male concubines, nothing modern ever reached them. They had no family to visit, no children to pass on stories, no legacy to shape. Their names were rarely written in official records. If they died quietly, their bodies were wrapped and buried by eunuchs, sometimes with a small stone, sometimes with nothing at all. They were not honored like generals, not remembered like poets, not counted like noblemen, because in the eyes of the state, they were tools. Once their use had ended, they were quietly discarded. Even those who tried to leave a mark found their stories erased. One record from the mid-Qing dynasty mentions a former concubine who spent his final years copying scriptures by hand. Hundreds of pages, perfect ink, no mistakes. When he died, the scrolls were burned. Not because he had written anything dangerous, but because his name was not high enough in the hierarchy to preserve. His work vanished. His life was reduced to a line in a duty ledger, removed from service, deceased. This was normal, and no one questioned it. Because inside the palace, silence was not just expected, it was enforced. Palace officials were forbidden from discussing the emperor's private life. Even guards and servants who worked near the imperial chambers signed oaths of secrecy. Breaking that silence could mean exile or execution. The unspoken rule was simple. What happened in the emperor's bedroom did not exist. This protected the emperor's image. It protected the reputation of the court, and it protected the idea that power could never be questioned. But it also destroyed the lives of those who served, because if you could not be remembered, you could not be mourned. Even after death, male concubines were often buried without ceremony. Sometimes not even under their real names, sometimes not at all. Their quarters were cleaned, their belongings redistributed, and their replacements arrived within days. The system continued. One out, one in. No pause. No history. Over time, the memory of these men disappeared completely. Ask a historian today for a list of imperial concubines, and nearly every name will be a woman. Ask about male concubines, and most will tell you there is little evidence. There are few records. There is not much to say. But that silence was never accidental. It was built into the system, enforced by law, reinforced by ritual, and preserved by generations who chose not to ask. And for the men who lived inside that silence, the only way to endure was to accept it, to stop hoping, to stop remembering, to stop speaking. And in time, they became exactly what the palace wanted them to be: beautiful, obedient, quiet, gone. The system did not end with a revolution. There was no uprising, no scandal, no public outrage. It faded slowly, quietly, just like the men inside it. As China's dynasties weakened in the 1800s, so did the palace structure. Wars, internal rebellions, and foreign pressures forced the court to focus outward. Less energy was spent maintaining rituals. Less money flowed into the harem system. The number of concubines, male and female, began to shrink, but the practice did not disappear overnight. Even in the final years of the Qing dynasty, male concubines still existed. They were fewer, less visible, but still present. One final record, from the late 1800s, mentions a boy named Wen Yu. He was taken at 13, castrated, placed near the emperor's quarters. He was said to be quiet, well-mannered, and obedient. And then, nothing. No further entries. No cause of death. No burial listed. His name vanished, like the others before him. As the imperial court collapsed in the early 1900s, the palace emptied. The Forbidden City was eventually converted into a museum. Its walls still stand. Its chambers still echo, but the lives lived inside are mostly untold, especially the lives of men like Wen Yu. Tour guides speak of emperors and empresses, of generals and eunuchs, but not of the boys who served as male concubines, not of the men who smiled and bowed and obeyed and were never remembered. Their legacy was built to disappear. No memoirs, no portraits, no tombs with names. They left behind no children to mourn them, no family to carry their memory, no one to say, he lived, he mattered. And yet, in rare moments, something surfaces. In a sealed writing desk discovered during palace renovations, workers found a scroll. It had no signature, just a single image, cranes flying above the palace wall. The brushwork was delicate, minimal, careful. Someone had painted it from memory, not as a statement, not as art for the court, but as a final act of self, a quiet record, not of who he was, but that he had been. No name, no inscription, just the cranes and the empty sky. We will never know who he was, whether he smiled by choice, whether he suffered in silence, whether he loved anyone or ever had the chance. But we know this, he was there. He stood in the same halls we now walk through. He looked out the same windows. And for a moment, he remembered the sky. He was called lucky. He was given silk. He was erased. That was the system. Not a scandal, not an accident. A process designed to control beauty, reshape identity, and discard what could not speak. For centuries, it worked. It worked so well that most of us only learned it existed once it was already gone.